Hello, everyone. Welcome. And thank you so much for joining us from whatever city and time zone this finds you in. And thank you, Smartwater Plus, for being a part of Well and Good Talks today. It's really wonderful to be with you here during Pride Month for Love Out Loud, celebrating the LGBTQ plus community while the fight for equality continues. My name is Melisse Gelula, and of Well and Good's two female founders, I'm the one who represents for Team Rainbow Flag. And given today's Love Out Loud theme, I thought I'd share with you that my spouse Tiffany and I just celebrated our 10th wedding anniversary in May. Thanks, panelists. So our gay wedding took place before gay marriage was legal in New York. So we had to cross state lines into Connecticut, of all places, to be entitled to that right. And as a result, we had two ceremonies. We had a legal one on a town hall lawn, and another one back in New York with a huge party attached and a lesbian officiant who is actually a writer and director of award-winning rom-coms. So like all queer people do every single day, we made lemonade. And fast forward 1 decade and one global pandemic later, and the LGBTQ plus community is focused on new concerns related to our rights and our well-being. In fact, as we celebrate Pride, there are an unprecedented number of new anti-gay, queer, trans laws across many states that seek to deny healthcare rights and personhood to trans people while permitting other forms of gay and queer discrimination. So for our very important conversation today, we're focused on the ways the ongoing fight for our rights impacts well-being and the role the wellness industry can and needs to play in furthering awareness, equality, inclusivity. I am joined by three amazing LGBTQ plus wellness leaders, and I'm so excited for you to hear their expertise and their point of view. I will ask our panelists to jump in and provide a little bio intel for themselves in my first question. So if you don't remember their backgrounds, they will get you up to speed. And attendees, please put any of your questions into the Q&A channel during any time during our talk. We'd love to take them at the end of our conversation if time allows, so feel free to just put them in there at any time. You don't have to remember them for the last few minutes. So to kick things off, and by way of an introduction, panelists, please tell us what your work and purpose is in the LGBTQ plus wellness space. And Rae, if you don't mind kicking it off for us, let everyone know your passion points and about your company and the contributions that you're working on in the wellness space.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm Rae McDaniel. I'm a non-binary human. I use they, them pronouns. And I'm a licensed therapist, gender specialist, coach, and educator based out of Chicago. And I help trans and non-binary folks transition their gender with more ease, joy, curiosity, and pleasure. And I do that in 3 ways. So I own and run Practical Audacity, which is a group private therapy practice in Chicago with 16 plus therapists, all who are LGBTQ plus affirming, many of whom identify within that population. I also run Gender Fuck the Club, which is a group coaching community for trans and non-binary folks who want to transition their gender with less suffering and more ease. And then I also do a lot of things like this panel, where I do speaking and DEI transgender inclusion work with companies and professionals across the medical, mental health, and wellness fields.
Thank you. Thank you. Erica, do you want to take it?
Sure. My name is Chidi, and I'm the co-founder and CEO of LOOM. We're a well-being platform that empowers women through sexual and reproductive health. And I have spent probably the better part of my life as a sexual and reproductive health educator and doula. I'm also an author. And, you know, in terms of my purpose, really what I show up to do every single day is to figure out how to help people thrive in their bodies. And, you know, right now in terms of the work I'm specifically doing at LOOM, which I think I shared with you, Melisse, when we were talking, is really focusing on building and uplifting cis women who are struggling with their sexual and reproductive health, but as a person in like the wider spectrum, I really focus my personal time and the work that I get back to the community around making sure that that type of equality is happening across the gender spectrum. But I think, and it's interesting, it's something I've really been wrestling with, and I was trying to decide whether or not I would kind of bring it forward in this panel, but I think what I've learned over the years, being able to have worked with trans people that are gestating, working with people that are non-binary that identify as a pregnant person, and working with women who identify as mothers who are pregnant, is that they all have very specific, very individuated needs. And I think what's been happening lately, in my perspective, is this kind of lumping of like, let's put all the marginalized groups in one bucket and make sure that they're getting the support. And I think that's kind of harmful, actually. And I think the deep specificity and nuance is really what is going to help people move through their life with more ease and more support. And so I just wanted to kind of flag that for anyone who is in the LGBTQIA community who might go to LOOM and feel like there's, some, the language is very neutral and encompassing, but it might not feel like it's speaking specifically to folks that might not identify, as cis women. And that is true, but that is with intention and not to exclude, but to say that we at LOOM and me individually want to see platforms rise up that meet the exact needs of the different communities. And there shouldn't be this like focus that women, cis women, have to now take on all of the load and make sure everyone's getting what they need, when we actually might not have the clarity to be able to execute and support different communities in the way that they need to. So it's like a very long statement, but hopefully it kind of like jogs thinking around how we need to support people, and that it's not really one size fits all, which is kind of how I feel well-being is handling like LGBTQIA needs in certain aspects. That was an intro and obviously a soapbox statement, but
no, thanks for bringing it forward. I think
out there.
Yeah, but thanks for putting it out there, and we'll come back to elements of that in our conversation, Erica. Thank you. Bethany.
Erica, I love you so much. We're so honored. I'm so honored to get to be in this panel with you and with all of you. But I just like, yeah, that was really great, and I totally hear what you're saying, and I think it's very, very thoughtful and very interesting. And actually, as someone who is trying to get pregnant right now, and it's really not been an easy road, I just I'm really connecting with a lot of what you're saying, and I think you should open a LOOM in New York specifically for me. So anyway, just for me. Hi, everyone. My name is Bethany C. Meyers. I'm the founder and CEO of the be.come Project. The be.come Project is an online fitness platform that is centered around body neutrality and comes at it from a joyful movement, shame-free movement, kind of anti-diet culture, fuck the beauty standards approach. I worked in fitness forever. In fact, Melisse was one of my clients way back in the day. And the be.come Project is, it's definitely movement, but it's really looking at it from a different lens. And I almost have started to feel like we're almost in like the more of a mental health space, right? Like movement for mental health. And I think that's like a shift that we'll be taking even more so in the future. But we don't come at anything from a weight loss stance or like you need to change this about yourself. It's very much like showing up, being present in your body, connecting with your body. And I'm a non-binary person as well. My pronouns are they, them. And I think, we have all kinds of people who take the be.come Project. We definitely have queer folks who are our clients. I think just, queer people attract queer people. Here we all sit together. And so one thing that I think that is so important is so many people have a difficult time feeling comfortable and safe in their body. I think that for queer people, that is exasperated. It's just like times 10, right? Because at a very young age, there was like pieces of yourself that just, you're expected to be straight. So that lingers along with you. And then of course there's body dysmorphia, gender dysmorphia, top surgery, trans folks, like all of those things can feel very physical. And I think the idea with the Become Project and body neutrality is to try to take it away from the physical and more to like the internal, right, of like who we really are. And this is just the exterior. So in that sense, I think that that is the connection with the queer community. I just really have a heart for helping more queer people feel comfortable in their bodies. And that being said, many people feeling more comfortable in their bodies. So, yeah.
Thank you. That's fantastic. And it's a great segue to something that I was thinking about after speaking with all of you. First of all, I just wanted to clarify that all of these offerings that we're talking about, the Become Project, Practical Audacity, LOOM, these are digital platforms. Is that right, Rae? Did I get that one correct?
Close. So Practical
Close.
Audacity is an in-person practice, but Genderfuck is an online platform.
Thank you. Thank you for clarifying. Perfect. And I like that you got to say that. So I think that, a lot of us Americans in particular, we do walk around thinking all kinds of things about our bodies. And whether we know this intellectually or not, a lot of it is, patriarchal shame-based stuff, that our bodies limit us, betray us, embarrass us at the beach, like whatever, BS we're being fed. And one of the things that you're all working on in your specific ways, I think, is offering a recalibration of that thinking on the personal level and on the cultural level, and affirming our relationship with our bodies and ourselves. So maybe you could each speak to a little bit more of how your work is doing that through the LGBTQ lens. And Rae, maybe I'll just pass that back to you since you began the last round.
Sure, absolutely. So, Bethany, I so resonate with what you're saying about queer and trans folks because that is so, so true. So, a lot of the folks that I work with, and as a non binary person who's had top surgery myself, I know what it's like to not feel 100% comfortable in my body. And I see that in a lot of my clients. And another thing, Bethany, I love about your work is that idea of body neutrality. And I think that comes into play in my work as well of how do trans people who often have gender dysphoria that manifest in a lot of body dysphoria, how do they feel good in their bodies and feel pleasure and joy and self-love while at the same time holding that they don't always love every single part of their body? They might want to change it medically in the future. And that is okay. And that's something to celebrate. But in the meantime, how do they feel comfortable in their bodies right now that they have today? And I do a lot of work kind of in the similar vein of body neutrality, of helping my clients discover ways that they can appreciate, love, and find pleasure in their bodies by dancing in a room with no mirrors, by talking about the things they're already doing that bring them pleasure, taking a walk with their dog, going to the park, doing yoga, being able to take a really awesome sensual bath where you put coconut oil in there and you touch your skin and see how that feels, and expanding options for people to experience self-love even in a body that doesn't feel 100% comfortable.
Yeah, thank you. And Bethany, do you want to respond to that through the movement offering?
Yeah, I mean, I love what you just had to say. It's something that's just sticking out in my head was like taking a bath and like touching your skin. I've been really incorporating a lot of like touch your heart or like pound your legs, right? Like some more like physical attributes of really touching and connecting with the body, which I think has also just felt really good for myself. I think in response to the question, what all of us are doing are very radical acts in and of themselves. And like when we break it down beyond fitness, right? Or beyond whatever sexual health, reproduction, for me, fitness, when I start to break it down beyond that, like we're dealing with systematic structures that have been in place and ideals that have been in place for a very, 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 very long time. And so the work in and of itself is social justice, right? Like it doesn't exist without working to dismantle racism and, you know, homophobia and, you know, all of these things, like those have to be broken down. And so oftentimes what seems like a little thing that you're working on, you start to like peel it back and you're like, holy shit, this is huge, right? We feel this way about our bodies for like so many reasons. And then you add in layers of like other people who have been treated way worse than a body than mine looks like, right? Like I also want to acknowledge on this that I'm a thin white person. How I have experienced the world in my body is much, much different than how other people have experienced the world in their body, you know? So that piece really has to be recognized. It has to be recognized in order for it to be true, and in order for like change to happen, and in order to create truly safe spaces for people to experience themselves.
Yeah, I really agree with both of what you're saying. Also, I take note, one of the highlights for me of what virtual world we live in now, or what the pandemic did, is I can do panels now and take notes. So that's what I'm doing while I'm listening. It helps me also kind of stay like engaged. I'm going to try and see if that transfers to the real world, being like, I have my notepad with me, hold on, let me just but I think in terms of the question you asked, Melisse, and you know, this idea of like, what are we doing like from an LGBTQIA space, like within our different, you know, industries, I just feel, for me, like showing up in my Black body, I identify as a cis woman, but my pronouns are she and they, but I'm lesbian, and doing the work that I'm doing is it, you know? It's like, I think just the actual visibility of having, you know, built this business, to be in tech, to have raised venture, to have come from a very non-traditional, you know, background, and to now be like situated right in the middle of like the quote unquote tech world. And so to me, like, I think visibility is so important with, and that really is the work, right? And I also feel it's, to me, and again, that's just, I can only speak for myself. I think everyone has their way of identifying like what the work is for them. But I think for me, especially being like a child of immigrant parents, where like there was never really space for me to come out early. I just had to like be the good thing. I think it has been very helpful for me through my life to see other people come out and like be thriving, you know? Even just that little piece is like, oh, like you can be gay and you can also like have a job, not even like a fantastic job, just being around and getting to be yourself. And so, you know, sometimes I think because we are already like marginalized as a population or as a group, there's this thing of like, how do we like help? How are we doing the work for our group, or how are we showing up for the group? And I'm like, some of it, just saying who we are and like doing the thing that we're doing is enough sometimes, especially given that I would imagine many of us, I can again only speak for myself, come from like a traumatic background in one way or another, and like this pressure to always be doing something and to be like making change is just like, it's so relentless. And I feel like we need permission to just be like, just be, you know, just do your thing. And if you feel safe enough, say that you are who you are as you do it. Like that's really transformative. And like, you know, it's like, it's lifelong work because you have to keep coming out again and again and again. And so I think that, just like to simplify it for me, that's kind of what I've tried to tell myself like more recently, is just like being present in places where there are not really many of us or any of us. And being ourselves authentically is like a big part of the work, and actually a big part of like our own well-being. Like I'm better, I'm healthier when I can just be like, I'm gay and I do these other things, versus being like not able to speak to that, because I wasn't really able to speak to that publicly for a long time.
Thank you for sharing that. There's so much in there that is really, really, really powerful. I think, you know, in the wellness space too, we can get really caught on, you know, self-improvement. And it's, something that, look, I'm a therapy head. Like, I really believe that there's like self-awareness is really important and personal growth is really important, doing the work, but also, just being, just showing up in the world to, the effort that you're supporting with Loom is incredible, right? Because you're providing resources that are so needed and so underserved. Also, you're putting a stake in the ground there too.
Yeah, well, just to jump in, because I forgot that part of the question around like, all the bullshit we get served up around our bodies and stuff. Like, we did a post today about, the milk line, also known as the mammary ridge, which basically in all mammals, there is a line that's like, a line of like mesenchymal cells that's created like a week, like 4 of gestation, and then it usually disappears by week 9, and it usually leaves just like the 2 kind of nipple components, the 2 nipples that we see on people's bodies, however they decide to define them as. But then sometimes there are accessory nipples that come, and you don't get to see them unless you become pregnant or gestating. And sometimes those accessory nipples are like underneath the skin, and then you just have these like weird little lumps in these like places across this line. Or sometimes you have a 3rd or 4th or 5th nipple, and sometimes if you decide to deliver a baby or have a baby, that nipple will like leak milk. And we did that post because I was like, accessory nipples are really they're actually not that, like 1 to 6% of the population has them, but they're not abnormal. They're just like a thing. And like, there's this weird like rhetoric in our culture of like, ooh, like 3rd nipples are weird, and like, you're fucking weird if you have a 3rd nipple. And it's actually like, no, not really. So it's like that's interesting, like what the work is doing at a microcosm. It's like posts like that to be like, this is the science, it's actually fine, and like, here's what to expect, and probably no one's telling you about that. And so I think like our culture is just so misogynistic and so patriarchal and so paternalistic. It wants very limited information out there. It wants to like drive like the hegemony, like these things are weird, these things are okay, these things are like gray area, and we'll decide if we want to make them okay or bad. And I think what we're trying to do at Loom is just be like, here's the science, here's like a better way of understanding the science, and then you can associate we're not going to associate anything being good or negative. It's always going to be neutral, and it's going to be like backed with information. And I think that's like to me, it feels like a soft way to encourage like people to not feel shame in their bodies without being like, hey girl, like don't hate yourself. It's like, you can do that, but like that tape is so deep and so quiet and like reinforced at every thing you touch and feel. And so I think by not saying that, but giving people information to like go into critical thinking and have something to defend like whatever is going on in their body that they have felt bad about, but to have something concrete to lean into is just like one more tool to add to like helping people like remove some of that negative self-talk.
Okay, this is like the only panel of my life, I think, where we're talking about 3rd, 4th, and 5th nipples. So I'm so excited. Come on another panel with me, please. This is just amazing to me. And you're making me think too about just our fascination with normal, right? Without realizing what a construct that is and who put that construct there, and how most of us don't feel like we fit that. Even within a wellness framework, I think a lot of people are striving to meet some standard of normal, whether that's a healthy body in their, mind or not, right? Or for other reasons. So, I mean, for me, this goes to something that all of you have addressed in our prior conversations, is our fascination with just gendering everything, right? So we kind of gender all these things that are inanimate objects or experiences that are human, perhaps. Can we just talk about that for a minute? Because I think that really plays out in the wellness space. And I think we all know that participating fully and authentically as ourselves in wellness, like we need to kind of point out what we're gendering and using gender neutral language perhaps is a way to move forward. So maybe you can jump in on that, guys.
Yeah, I think the gendering of inanimate objects is really creepy and very weird. Like, I just think it's a strange act that feels a bit perverse to me. And like, I always think about baby clothes because it really wasn't that long ago that there was just baby clothes, like even like the 1950s, like it was just like baby clothes, right? And now, I mean, if you look at kids sections, it's just very like pink and blue and sparkle and football. And it's really strange how we're so like interested in kids' genitalia at such a young age, and like like that's a whole other topic, but I'll stick to what I really know the most about, and which is in fitness. I just recently did a post on this, like talking about the gendering of movement and how like the girls push up was a kneeling push up and the boys push up was a push up on the feet. And not only does it tell, I'm going to just speak in really gender terms right now. So not only does it tell like young girls that they're the weaker ones, right? Because their push-up is the kneeling push-up. It then also creates a space of toxic masculinity for young boys who, if they cannot do a push-up on their feet, right, then then they have to like step down into a girl's push-up. So it creates this place where they like can't fail or they can't be weak and they have to be the strongest ones. And then it also like doesn't inform the person about the movement that they're actually doing. And if you follow any of my work, I'm a really big believer that there is no easy exercise. There's just the exercise that feels best for your body. And like we all have different bodies. So the idea that like you're constantly pushing to this hardest level is just so silly because you may just be injuring yourself, right? So if you're doing the hardest version of a push-up, but you only feel it in your neck and your lower back, you're not doing a push-up. It's for your chest and abs. So anyway, I digress slightly here, but I think when we can give actual names to things that are not necessarily surrounded by gender to describe, we create a more informative environment for how to perceive the words, how to take in the words, and then how to like use those words within your body.
I love that you said this. I get very frustrated when I'm working out and they're like, dudes get these weights and ladies get this size weight. Right. What I really want to know is, are we doing deadlifts or are we doing tricep extensions? Because then I would get very different weights. Like I don't really feel like the other categories are very helpful. So when you talk about specificity, I love that. I feel like there are still ways that we are playing into some very old stereotypes, which avoid that specificity.
Absolutely. I'm actually working on a post right now and I'm talking about the weights. And I'm like, no, we need to talk about like the heavier set of weights or the lighter set of weights, right? That's like a very simple way to change it. Where I think sometimes when people think about gender neutral language, it has to be like, oh, I have to speak in tongues or something. I have to like, I don't know. It's so exhausting. And like, I really love language. The Gemini in me likes to find unique words and things. And so a lot of it is just sort of reframing the way that you're speaking, much like a good writer would search for, other ways to describe something. So yeah.
Yeah, this is such a great topic, and it's such a big one that is also so simple to address. But yeah, Bethany, people feel like gender neutral language is this huge hurdle to overcome, when in reality, a lot of us do this fairly naturally. Or if we just think about it a little bit, then it's not that hard. And I love the examples that y'all were giving in the fitness world of girls push-ups and boys push-ups, or even like masculine exercises like weightlifting, deadlifting, or feminine exercises like Pilates or beret. That's ridiculous. They're just bodies and they just move in different ways and have different needs. And I think a lot of us use gendered language without thinking about it when it comes to greetings. Even like, hey, ladies, hey, guys, instead of, hey, y'all, or hey, everybody, or hey, class, or hey, team. And I imagine most of the people listening did not really notice that I haven't been gendering my language. And that's the case in most cases, is that if you degender your language, the everyday person is probably not going to notice that much, but the people that it matters to will notice a lot. And it makes a huge difference in whether or not they feel safe and seen in a space. And Erica, I appreciated what you were saying earlier when you were talking about your work, saying people who are pregnant or the gestating partner, and that is key. And I also love that you brought in that intentionality of your language, which is exactly what I teach. Is that a lot of people gender spaces or services without being intentional. And instead of thinking about who is it that I really want to serve? Is it truly women or is it anybody who's been impacted by patriarchy? Is it truly cis female mothers or is it anybody who's pregnant or anybody who is gestating? And I think as a wellness community, if we can get a lot more specific about what are we trying to do? What is our intention? Who are we talking to? And think about, are we using gender as a placeholder instead of saying what we actually mean? And I see this happen a lot when we're talking about energy as well, right? Masculine and feminine energy, which is such an interesting way to frame that. And if we really said what we mean, often people would be talking about aggressive or competitive energy, or soft or flowy or nurturing energy. And none of those things, none of those characteristics are gendered. We all contain all of those energies within us. So instead of seeing degendering language as, putting a potato sack on everything and getting rid of gender completely, it's more about how do we intentionally create the most inclusive environment that includes the most amount of people that we actually are trying to talk to. And even just shifting that up a little bit can make such a huge difference in people's experience of wellness providers, of spaces. And it's a fairly simple thing to start noticing in yourself.
I'll add a little to that. I think it's so incredibly said. And I think that not only can it help open up a safer space for queer people and gender non-conforming people, but I also think for all the cis folks out there, I love you too. I think that it creates less pressure on women, cis women, and less pressure on cis men to fit into certain boxes. And then when they inevitably don't, right? Or when a man is feeling sensitive, compassionate, the feminine energy, soft, they don't feel like they're in the wrong box or they've stepped in the wrong lane. So I actually think this conversation is often so directed in the queer space, and that's where I live, that's where I direct it to. But I actually think for everyone, it can really help neutralize gender.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and that is such a big part of my message as well, is that gender freedom and gender liberation is not just for queer and trans people, it's for everybody, because we've all been stuffed into these tiny, tiny boxes since before we were born. Research shows that if you tell somebody that a baby in the womb is a boy or a girl, they talk to the belly of the person who is gestating the baby differently. It starts even before we're born. So we've all been so just in the thick of this gendered world, and it can create so much freedom for everybody, for us all to put that down and question if that is really the most helpful frame.
I think that's very powerful. The on a personal level, I've found, the spiritual part of masculine energies and feminine energies. I've seen that, over 2 decades of being in wellness. And as a spiritual component, it's always just not felt accurate to me, to be, it was very hard for me to sort of embrace one or the other. And I felt so much more free, I suppose, the way you were describing it. These are attributes of, am I feeling competitive? Is that more of my nature? I would say probably yes. And I think that like there are ways in which the wellness industry itself can perpetuate unconsciously or unthinkingly or without critically thinking about it. We can perpetuate these things. I think you're already identifying some of the ways that the wellness space can better support LGBTQ inclusivity and the community. Are there other examples? I mean, Bethany, you gave some super concrete ones about a fitness space, but Erica and Rae, are there other really tangible or tactical words or actions that the wellness community or the wellness space can be doing to build inclusion?
Yeah, I think like from the healthcare and kind of sexual reproductive health space, I think more gender affirming care is definitely something that needs to be dug into more. And I think, I think providers should feel more comfortable just asking people what their pronouns are. It's like you want to be asked, if they have a feeling that they are in the presence of someone, on our spectrum, just ask. It's a great way to start the conversation. And, if their assumption is incorrect, then it's incorrect, but it's also just getting into the habit of it. And I think that's the thing too, of like gender liberation is liberating for cis people and for everyone else. And it's basically them kind of getting more comfortable with incorporating that language and not thinking that that language is to like call them out or to make them wrong or incorrect. It's just to help with assimilation. Like we can't assimilate if people are resistant to using it because they think they're going to make a mistake. It's like learning more language, which is not going to be a perfect practice. It's going to be funny and weird, and that's okay. And so I think, unfortunately, like our culture, again, like, being as a Black person, I really feel that, one of the kind of most, I would say, virulent, damaging kind of tenets of white supremacy really is perfection. And so people are like, if I can't get it right, I'm not going to even try. And that inability to want to be just, imperfect and fluid with something is something that is not a common practice in a white supremacist culture. And so I think that is also another thing that we're up against. Like nothing is casual, everything is exacting. And that's actually just not what the gender nonconforming or gender affirming process is like. It is much more of a fluid flow. And someone might have these pronouns for a little while and be like, actually, no, these pronouns are better. And then everybody's got to get on board with these new pronouns. And that's totally okay. And so I think it needs to start early. It needs to start in schools, like the way they're teaching meditation now, like in kindergarten, like they need to be teaching all of these potential pronouns. So it's coming on board really early. And so that, and the same thing for, for care providers. And then at the same time, like different environments calling out even with more specificity who they're speaking to will help people understand like, oh, they're speaking to that kind of person. Okay, those aren't my pronouns. Maybe I'll go see if I can find somewhere else that's actually speaking to my kind of people. And I think that also helps reduce harm. Like someone might think it's for them and they go into a thing and it's not for them, and that's harmful. So I think there's a long way to go, but I think it starts off as simply as just making it standard practice to ask every single patient, every single client, what are your pronouns, to kick off. First question, if it's not on a form. And more people are more and more institutions are starting to put it into forms. Even now on Slack, on Zoom, like there's just places, it's like, it's happening, which I think is, I think that's one of the cool things about tech is like tech can accelerate some of these things in a way that like governments can't do as quickly. So that's, and as healthcare is becoming more technologically backed, I think we can try to see how, I'm excited to see how that like expands more over time.
Yeah.
Okay. Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just gonna jump in and piggyback off of Erica. I so appreciate that you brought up the perfectionism and how that holds people back from connecting. That is such a huge thing that I see. And I also tie that to shame and shame research. I'm a big Brene Brownite, but talking about how when people are afraid to make a mistake, they make a mistake, they experience shame, and what shame does is it disconnects us from the people around us. And so, what happens is when you become afraid to make a mistake or you make a mistake and then you have this shame wash over you, you are then more likely to disconnect and not engage with the trans, non binary, queer person in front of you. And so, I want to let everybody off the hook and just say, you're going to screw up. And that's fine. It's about the repair. That's something that we know from relationship research from years and years and years is the quality of a relationship. It's not about never making a mistake. It is about how you repair that mistake and how you learn from it. And so when we're talking about what can we do, the language piece, I honestly think will get you 80% of the way there because the bar is set pretty low at this point. So if you can get pronouns right by asking every single person their pronouns, preferably having it in your forms or ways that it can show up like on Zoom or our Slack, like you've mentioned, that goes a long way in affirming. And I would say too, make sure that you are asking every person about their pronouns because there's not one way that trans people look. And there's a lot of trans and non binary folks who may choose to not change their outward appearance or just may not be out in every area of their life. And going to a place where their pronouns are asked, where they're asked, what do they want to be called, which may not match up to their legal name. Those things are very powerful and affirming. And other really practical things, bathrooms are a big topic. And it's a very stressful place for a lot of trans and non binary folks. So, making clear what your bathroom policy is. If you have a gender neutral bathroom, make sure that people know where that is. And with your gendered bathrooms, make sure that people know that they can go in whatever bathroom feels good for them and that they'll be safe there. And that policy should be somewhere where it can be seen. And I would also emphasize the importance of every point of contact and not misgendering somebody. So, for example, I had a massage therapist who asked me about my top surgery scars. And that nobody's, well, I just got top surgery, so I haven't seen any other massage therapist. But it was surprising to me because that's not a question that I'd normally hear. And it allowed us to have a conversation about, well, what are my needs around my scars? How can we work on shoulder mobility? How can we work on that scar tissue? But if in the process of signing up to see this massage therapist, I had a form that had me check male or female. If there was not a place for my preferred name, which is different than my legal name, then I probably wouldn't have felt okay talking about my top surgery scars. I would assume that that is not a place that would be welcoming. And I think in the wellness world, we have to assume that queer and trans people don't think that they're going to be welcome, and it needs to be explicitly stated. And it's sad that that is the case, but it's true. And that doesn't have to be anything wildly complicated. This is a little bit of an aside from the wellness world, but I just went to a new barber shop, plain old barber shop, not a LGBTQ barber shop, but it said for all bodies or for all hair, something like that in their tagline. And that alone was enough for me to feel safe there. And the fact that I wasn't gendered when I walked in. So those little, I call them flags, right, off the hanky code, those flags make a really big difference in someone assessing whether or not they're going to use a certain service or whether or not they feel safe there.
Yeah, thank you. Those examples are really, really helpful and super grounded. I was thinking about the Brene Brown reference and shame, and how Brene says that empathy is the antidote to shame. So I'm just doing some math here, thinking, does the wellness industry need to be more empathetic in order to be more inclusive? Is empathy our tool? One of our umbrella tools that we can use.
Well, I also think I think empathy is important, but I also think inclusion is important. Hiring people that are gender nonconforming, that are BIPOC, that are from all these different swaths, and putting them in editorial roles, putting them in, outward external facing roles, and giving them actual power to help with decision making. Because I think there's a quality of empathy that comes when you are not the group trying to help the group, and when you are the group helping the group. And so I think there just needs to be more of a combinator approach, because I think that, not to say anyone else's empathy is less integral than another's, just a lack of visibility into the nuanced need, always going to just kind of cap how far the empathy can grow. So I think the empathy piece is super important, but really I think diversity in teams and visibility really matters.
Yes. Yeah. Empathy can't replace those things.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I mean, I could just keep this conversation going on forever and ever, and I have a million more questions, but I'm going to peek into the Q&A and see if there are any here that we can take before our time together is up. Let's see. Will people be doing Q&A? Let me just take a quick look. Bear with me. I think we tackled some of these. The one that I don't think we've addressed just yet is something that's in the news very much right now around the sports conversation. The question isn't not from an anonymous person who says it may not be politically correct to ask, but and I understand it may not be fair to have trans women compete in athletic events with biological females. What do we think about this?
This is such a loaded topic, huh?
I know.
This is a very hot topic.
It is a very hot topic right now. Thanks for jumping in on it, Bethany.
I mean, I'll give I'll give us a few small bits of things. It's not necessarily going to take it. I don't know that it's going to solve anything. I definitely have some personal experience with this. I have a pretty conservative family. They have they're super sports. They have 2 girls in sports. There's a very big fear for them surrounding sports that that parents will lie about their kids in order to get them into a different division, so that way they can improve. This is also, where do I want to go with this? This is just, I think that this situation, or what's happening with sports, has been really, really politicized. And so therefore we've gotten away from what the heart of the situation actually is and what's happening. And we've lost empathy for specifically thinking about kids in sports, and how kids need to move and they need to feel accepted and safe in sports. And are we creating a problem that doesn't actually exist? I was like, why are young boys just trying to get on the girls' team? She was like, no. I was like, okay, so it hasn't even happened yet. So I think that this conversation gets really heated because it has been so politicized. And to be quite honest, I think politicized on both sides. So I'm actually not really speaking necessarily for one or the other. I just think it's been really, really stretched and torn. The other thing I think is important to remember is every single human. So even if you took all the boys on the boys team and you measured all of their levels and their testosterone, they would all vary very differently, right? Those levels do not exist just for a male or a female. They are all super, super varied. So in my personal opinion, I know that this is a long shot, but I think that we should change up the way that we divvy out sports teams and that we separate them. And I think already there's like inequities because of this happening within, because we're like, here's the boys team, here's the girls team. And maybe we should be judging more on like in almost like in wrestling, where you have like weight categories or speed categories or strength categories, and you could qualify for different categories. What I personally think will happen, maybe if we get our stuff together, but I actually think it will start to move that way. And we'll maybe start to tip into something else where we can reimagine maybe one day the way that we have sports. But that's a very short clipped answer to a long conversation. Rae, you may have more amazing stuff to add to that and could speak to some of it better, Erica, or anyone.
Well, so number one, I'm not a sports person and I just call everything sports ball. So I'm probably not the person here to be the expert. But Bethany, I agree with everything that you're saying. And my additional tidbit would be that we really don't know what causes a competitive advantage. So lots of people of all genders have advantages based on their genetic makeup. They're taller or shorter, or they have bigger bones, they're leaner. There's lots of things that would give somebody a competitive advantage in a certain sport. And we're fixating on hormone levels, which there are not enough studies to show how those impact performance. Even our understanding of testosterone is really outdated. There's a lot of people doing not a lot, there's some people doing studies on social neuroendocrinology around hormone levels and the effect they actually have in the body. And we're starting to understand that there's a lot we don't know and a lot of misconceptions. The other thing that I really have a problem with here is, Bethany, like you mentioned, this is largely talking about children, right? Kids. There's some conversation about Olympic sports or bigger teams, but really a lot of it is about just children wanting to play a sport who are never going to go on and compete in any sort of kind of big wig sports league. They just want to play. And so I also question, how much of an issue is this, and can we just let kids play ball? And I agree that if there is some sort of categories that we can put people in that are based on ability and not on gender, I think that would suit everybody better, trans and cis people alike. I will also say this, there's concern about the fact that this seems to be accusation based, and the way to check is often to examine a child's genitals, which is absurd and invasive. And it builds this culture of accusing someone of being trans like it is a bad thing. And then the child who may be trans having to submit to something like a genital exam, which is just baffling to me.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I'll just chime in and say I really hear both of what you are sharing. And I think too, just even like the social, like neuroendocrinology kind of component is really interesting too. I'll kick it like 30 years from now and say more than I have like a small hunch that there probably will be like a fusing that will happen where, because I think the generation that's coming up below us and the generation that's like super young, like 2 or 3 years old, and the babes that aren't even here yet, the people that aren't even here yet, are going to demand something very different. And all of the constructs that we have locked in right now are going to feel very arcane and confusing because there's a lot of like gender permission happening at a much younger age now. And so I hold like high hope that we'll just have Olympic like a great example too is like the first NFL player came out as gay yesterday. Even then, also his coming out video was so, I know it wasn't intentionally funny, but like my girlfriend and I just were like cackling in the most gleeful way because he's like, hey, I just want to take a minute and let everybody know I'm gay. And I was like, yeah, you take that minute, you take it, you tell us. I was like, I'll give you 5 minutes, I'll give you 10, I don't care, whatever. But you know, it was just like, it was such a casual little video, and he's just like, that's what I am now, thank you everybody, I have a great family. You know, and I just was like, okay, that's a moment. And then it's like, you know, now the NBA are recruiting female coaches to lead NBA teams. And like, that's the moment. And so there's something happening where it's just kind of like, and I'm actually not a major sports person. I just like, I love data. And it's just interesting. There's like something happening that is like anecdotal, but like, I think it will be very causal in like 30 to 50 years, being like these small shifts, like laddered up to, you know, something else that we like now can feel a little bit more proud of as a society, you know. And I think it'd be so cool to see like, you know, genderless gymnastics. Like it's a, you know, because gymnasts are like around the same, they're smaller people. Like there's just like, it would just be so much more interesting. And like, it would actually be harder, I feel like, if we just pulled everybody under the same and we're like, it's by weight, it's by age, it's by some other things, as opposed to it's men and it's women, which is so limiting, you know. It's, there's no, and like, what do you do if you're a non-binary athlete? Like, what's your flow? It's just like, it seems like it has to be on its way out. It's not going to be, maybe not in our lifetime, but it's just, it seems unsustainable, especially as like healthcare starts to get more and more involved and make like disclaiming one's pronouns, but it's just like, it's, right. That's my feeling. So I don't even, I love that question, because it's like, I actually don't even have, there's no answer to that question. The answer is like not applicable, because I feel like we're on like a continuum now, trying to move away from having to answer that question.
Yeah. And the generations behind us are going to take care to answer it.
Yeah, they'll just be like, they're not going to have it. They're just going to be, we're just not going to.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I mean, like, look at Naomi right now being like, I'm not doing this, I'm not doing Wimbledon, I'm not doing that. It's like, that's unheard of. But she's young and she's like, I don't want to do that anymore. So it's like, I just feel like there's going to be more of that will hopefully like protect generations that come forward, you know?
Yes. I am looking at the time and we are out of it. Thank you, brilliant panelists, for joining me at Well+Good Talks today for this amazing conversation. Well+Good, if we want to do part 2, I'm just like bookmarking that in my calendar right now, because there's a lot more we could say. Before we peace out, can you all just tell our attendees where to find you on the internet and social? Yeah. Erica, do you just want to jump in?
Sure. You can find me at Erica Chidi on Instagram, just my whole name. And you can find Loom at Loom HQ, LOOM HQ on the gram, and also on the internet, loomhq.com.
And you can find me at Practical Audacity on Instagram and Facebook. You can also find me at genderfuck, that's gender FCK, no U because we are polite, .club. That's genderfuck.club, and practicalaudacity.com.
And y'all can find me in Bethany C. Meyers on Instagram, and the be.come project on wherever on the internet.
Every channel on the internet. And you can find me at Melisse Joy on Instagram. I am Well+Good on Instagram and wellandgood.com. Thank you so much, everyone, for coming today. And thank you to the invisible goddesses in the background, Sarah and Jen, who are yes, exactly, our tech folks and wranglers. So thank you so much, everyone. We'll see you soon. Be well.